Welcome to TechTalk Podcasts by Certes IT Service Solutions. In today's episode, we explore cybersecurity in the age of AI. Our host, Jon Grainger, is joined by James Desmond, a veteran with over 2 decades of experience in communications and cybersecurity. Together, they unpack the parallels between military and corporate cybersecurity practices, cybersecurity in the evolving world of AI, and why organisation-wide training is the cornerstone of effective cybersecurity practices. Let's dive into part 1.
So, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by James Desmond, a seasoned Air Force veteran who spent over 2 decades at the sharp edge of comms and cyber. We'll be talking about the parallels between military and corporate security, the realities behind buzzwords like military grade, and how, yes, you've guessed it, how is AI changing the threat landscape? James also shares some practical advice that any organisation can apply, even without a big budget. And finally, we'll look ahead to the future, from faster global travel to the role of trust in an AI-driven world. So let's dive in. And James, wonderful to have you back. We should just explain to everyone this is a second attempt. We had some communications challenges on the tech side. So look, we've both James and I've got everything crossed that this recording will work. Cool. Okay, well, James, maybe you can just introduce yourself to the listeners. I gave you a bit of a background there, but tell us a little bit about some of the highlights career-wise, and kind of how on earth did you get involved in comms and cyber?
I think even from a young age, I was always interested in understanding how things work. And at a young age, I got dismantling things, much to my parents' dismay, learning how they worked and being unable to actually put them back together. I think that was one of my mum's sayings, is like she didn't mind as long as I could actually put it back together at the end. But it did take me towards an area in engineering, and I started out working for the Air Force in electronic engineering and radars. But then as my career progressed, I moved more into cyber, more into IT and into cyber operations. And as I progressed, I moved through the different areas of cyber operations that we have in the Air Force, through like enable, defense and influencing positions, working within central government, the Defense Crisis Management Center, and even the MOD's Operations Center. But in aspects all across cybersecurity for the last 20 odd years.
Okay, James, so one of the questions I've got for you straight off the bat, which is, do you see a big difference or similarity between the way the military approaches cyber in terms of the mindset, compared to maybe the corporate approach? Do you think they're similar or very different?
I think there's a lot of similarities, and the military is trying to make sure we're aligning to industry. Previously, we've created our own language and the way we're doing things, but it makes it difficult to have a conversation across there. But one thing I want to try and explain to some of your listeners, that the MOD is actually not just one entity. It's, imagine, if you would, 1,000 separate companies with different business functions. It's broken down into that. So each one of these is its own company. One of them may be cyber operations, where they're basically trying to enable and facilitate communications across the world. Other people are focused on defending that network, and others are focused on trying to attack it. But I think one of the things that the MOD has worked out quite well is trying to align the strategy so everyone knows what they're going to should be doing and how they're going to be interacting. So imagine if you were an industry, how it would be if you've got preferred other companies that you're working with, that you know exactly how you should be working. Your business processes will just flow much better. And that's essentially where the MOD has been working currently, albeit on a small scale. But we've been trying to increase it and upscale it.
James, I think what you're saying is when you get the question, how does the military approach it? You're actually saying, well, John, there isn't like a single mindset that covers everywhere. There's lots and lots of different organizations that all work together, that get support centrally. So there's differences and similarities between all the different government entities, as it were.
Yes, and we've seen that we need to basically start making this even better. And this is where we've looked at such things as a skills for an information age for IT, where we are basically presenting the language and the levels and codifying every different area within IT. So that when we can say it's like, oh, you work with this in particular area at this level, therefore you're required to have these skills. And this is going to allow us to basically say that when we're getting individuals to work for us, they know exactly what they're going to be doing. And what the MOD is doing now as a whole is translating that to all of its industry. So, lawyers, medics, doctors, admin assistants, any particular class of worker is going to have their skills codified. So then it's going to make it easier to know what is required of your job and how you can progress going through it.
I mean, I can imagine everything that the MOD military does is just all massive scale, as a civvy, sort of, imagining it. But to codify all of that, that's quite a lot of work. And also, I suppose you've got to think about, are you guys taking in external counsel as well? I'm just thinking of maybe like the British Computer Society, or are there any other standards that you look to, or is it all sort of generated from within largely? These different skills, skills to go at different job levels and, job descriptions and career paths, etc. How are they generating all of that? And in particular with cyber, with maybe things changing so quickly, how do you keep pace?
Well, the skills for an information age, that's our current on its version 9, and that's a standalone organization that is apart from the MOD. And so we have used it because it's recognized within industry. So it's one that we can basically guarantee that it's going to be continually evolving and updating. Of course, there are some areas where we cannot borrow from a set skill framework, but in that sense, we are going to try and spend the time, like you said. But if we can, we're going to use what's already there.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking the skills for an information age. And apologies, I just thought that was like a phrase that you guys had adopted for an internal program. But that being an external body, that could also be very useful to sort of regular corporate businesses as well. Anyone who's looking to codify. I mean, you think about in IT in particular, a lot of companies won't necessarily have the resources to think of that framework in the first place.
No, it's very helpful. And when you're applying for a position or setting up a role, you need to know what that person is going to be doing. And this can help you basically say, well, we need this. But I think one of the flip sides is it does allow people to show their skills without having a degree or certain courses, because the whole point of it is to show, can you do this at this level? And there are many different ways you can show that. And this allows people to do that at an easier way. This is just one of the aspects in which you can use it. But one of the things that does lead on from there is allowing your staff the appropriate time to upskill. I think that's an important one.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're asking them to do something, you're not giving them the means to actually do it, which would be worse. I was just going to give you a little anecdote, James. In my career, early on, I was talking to someone about, what do I need to learn next? I was literally trying to work out, I suppose, a career in IT, in technology. What should my next steps be? And my career counselor at the time turned around and he said, John, he goes, when you look upwards, it seems very opaque. It's almost like a complete mystery because you're looking up, you've not been there before. But when you look backwards from where you've been, it's really obvious. It's a kind of, and I suppose the skills framework you were describing gives an element of transparency to what's ahead. There might be other mysterious things that people think happen when you become a manager or, all these other leadership qualities. But in terms of a very clear technical trajectory, I think it's incredibly useful. I think without it, teams can sometimes gravitate towards particular manufacturers. They can go for a particular, famous software maker, or, and they can kind of go down that route, and there's nothing wrong with being very familiar with those. But I think if you've got something that's more grounded in a curriculum that's maybe got some computer science thinking behind it, you're going to a certain extent, insulate your learning to changes in technology, because you're learning more principles than a very specific manufacturer. Do you agree?
Yeah, of course. That's one thing that you have to be always aware of, to be bottlenecked by a certain piece of technology that could then be, in a few years' time, made defunct. And then you then have to reskill in another area. That can be very difficult. And this is one thing within the MOD, that we're always cautious about relying on a single firm or a single piece of technology that is going to make sure that we're locked into that. So, and the MOD is always trying to ensure its resilience. So that's one thing that we're always trying to make sure is like, how can we make sure that we're not relying on a single technology?
Got it. So let's get into some buzzwords, James. When we spoke last time, I was talking about how Hollywood portrays the military, and also how it portrays cyber. And I think I gave an example where I find particularly annoying, which is whenever a bad guy is at the screen, you can when he or she types on the keyboard, there's this sort of noise that gets made, which I'm not aware of any computer this century at least makes that noise when you're typing with a classic green screen. But if we talked about military grade security, so I mean, what does that mean? Anything? If you had to define military grade security in cyber, how would you attempt to kind of explain that to a civilian like me, or someone who wants to think, oh yeah, I fancy having military grade security at our place?
I think it's a very much a misnomer. There's no such thing as military grade. I think the only time it would ever come is when you're looking at physical stuff that becomes more ruggedized, so you can be knocked about in the field and still work. But military grade, for what some people are looking at, is essentially something that's been out there for a while. It's defense in depth, is understanding that any one part of your security can fail, and not relying just because the paperwork says it's going to work, you can always rely on it. We are very cautious in the government to make sure that certain pieces of information technology is separated. So you will never have something that's very secure connected to the internet. So, so that essentially, even if it is someone who's guaranteeing that it's secure, just in case, it can never be hacked into. But this is one of the things that people may be thinking now with military grade. It's a concept that has been out for a short while. Secure by design. And this is where you basically ensure that everything you're putting in there is secure from the very concept of it. And it's not just basically the technology, but it's also how you design your processes and your people. You make sure that it is secure, so that you are fortifying your connections and fortifying your network, so that if anything does break, or a new piece of technology comes around that's going to undermine how it works, you're not going to be reliant on that one piece.
And James, I know from a software engineering point of view, is if you have security as an afterthought, you've delivered something, and then James is reviewing it and going, John, there's that you've got fixed IP addresses in here. There's no password protection. If you then try and reverse it or engineer it in at that point, it's pretty much pointless. And so when you're talking about secure by design, if there's one thing I would say, you got to think right at the beginning. And another point, James, that you've reminded me of is open source software, and understanding the lineage of open source is really important, because code that started off private and then became open source can be, not always, but can be problematic, because when it was private, it wasn't being bombarded with security vulnerabilities and issues, etc., etc. Often code that's born public is more secure. But again, beware of sweeping statements, because you don't want to trust any of that until you actually can test it. But the reason why I'm sort of mentioning it, James, is quite a few of our folks listening or watching will just consume software and not even be thinking about, well, who put this together, and were they thinking of security? So do you think that's part of your role, professional role, is to maybe say to the business, look, we've looked at this software and this meets our standards? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Otherwise, non-technical people switch on a computer. We talked about shadow IT and the ridiculous things people will say to a ChatGPT type device without really thinking where the data's going, etc. So, James, do you think your profession has a role to play in kind of trying to explain and assure around what we can and can't use?
I think the role of cybersecurity is to empower the business, not to hold it back. And with any businesses, they may not have the money to purchase bespoke licenses and software. So open source software may be something they have to use. But it's the role of a security professional to always advise and make sure that the business risk is aligned with the cyber risk, or vice versa. In doing so, that the C-suite staff understand what they're asking, and that the cyber team are helping them perform that function. So I wouldn't say that you should never use it. I would say that it's something you should be considerate of. And if you're going to use it, you'd have to make sure where that's going and how it's being used. But it's not just basically the cyber professionals that you need to be aware of it. It's a whole company. And this is where many people will be inundated with all these training scenarios they have to do just to basically make sure they think of it. Because there was a time when IT was only used by a small select few, and everyone else had paperwork. They didn't need to use it. They need to understand it. Whereas now IT is becoming more common across the board that they have to use it. And therefore, because of that, you need to understand how it's being used. An analogy with this would be, cars, is that, you have to be aware of car safety because they're inundated in our lives, and you don't need to have a driving license to be hurt by a car. So you need to have that same concept in cyber security and how your business is running.
It's another car analogy, James, was the old saying, which is, it's not your dad's car, it's your car. So there's I think we'll stick with the motoring piece. Just on the training side, again, that sort of triggered a thought. I think some of the kind of the techniques that get used, that you have training for, so you'll get maybe a pretend a spoof email that isn't a real spoof email. It's a spoof, if that makes sense. It's been sent there by the security folks to test whether you're going to click on it, etc., etc. Now, if I go through that training and if I get it wrong, and James calls me up and goes, John, just telling you that you clicked on a link you shouldn't have done, etc., etc. I think for the next week, 2 weeks, whatever, I'll be thinking about it. Actually, for me personally, I think if that happened, I'd probably think about it for a long time. Professionally, I think, how on earth did I fall for it? But I've got a bit of a theory, James, which I ran past you last time, which is some of this is kind of under the heading of the hand is faster than the eye, or there's a sort of a deep-rooted psychological tendency that we have, which means unless you're telling me really effectively, quite frequently, eventually I will fall for an approach, because it's just too difficult for me as a human. The way I'm wired is kind of to read into something. Maybe if the email's been generated by really good AI, so it's very, very convincing. It's just really difficult for me through training to be resistant to it. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on whether we are, is that training effective? You can't do nothing. and you need to time your comms, etc. But it does seem to be really difficult.
Well, fundamentally, it is looking at the why, not exactly because it happened, but the why. Because the weakest element of many networks and many systems is the users, is the people. It's unfortunate, but this is where many attackers have been targeting the weakest element, because you could spend many months trying to infiltrate a system, or you could try and sneak in the back way by getting users to do it for you. And this is where in the news, you've got a fair number of stories coming up of businesses who've been caught by this. But that's not the point. The point is that as a user, you're constantly reminded of this. It's always going to be in the forefront of your mind. So it's not a one and done training session. It's consistently upskilling and making your entire workforce aware of what's happening and ensuring that they're progressing. And if this is something you've been caught out, well, I wouldn't say that's necessarily your fault. It's like, well, why? Were you overworked? Did you click on the link because you're getting pressure from your boss? Do you not have the right technology to help you assist you in your work? Is the training not right? Is the environment you're working in not really taking security seriously? And this is where in cybersecurity, we haven't really unified that. I work in the Air Force, and we have to pay particular attention to air safety. And there was many failings in the past, but one thing that made it much better was a system known as Just Culture. And it's allowing people to hold their hands up and say, I made a mistake, or I don't think this is right. And you're not going to get in trouble for it unless you did something knowingly or hid the information. But if you do something and you've made a mistake and it's been genuine, even if it was your fault, well, how can we learn as an organization and make that better? The system we use is something called the Flowchart Analysis of Investigation Results, the FAIR system. And it takes, through the investigation, it takes every different step and says whether or not we should be looking at the culture, the training, the organization, or the individual. Because sometimes people just trying to make things better for everyone, and they typed in the wrong thing, and unfortunately, it's been a problem. There was an incident, unfortunately, that happened to Microsoft that I'm aware of, where an individual actually succumbed to a phishing attempt, clicked on a link, immediately realized he'd done it, went to his superiors and said, I've made a mistake. I've done this. He walked through the team of what he clicked on and what happens, and was able to help them solve it after about 2 days. And then he was fired because the organization thought, well, we've solved the problem now. The individual who caused the issue is no longer with us. But that's not the point. The issue could happen again. And this is what the training aspect is trying to align to.